The rain was relentless that night, hammering my roof as I stared out my kitchen window, watching my driveway turn into a parking lot for someone else's party. My name's Ethan Caldwell, and I've lived on Oakwood Lane for 3 years, running my landscaping business from my garage. That evening, my property wasn't mine anymore. It was an extension of Laura Hensley's backyard bash, the HOA president who seemed to think her smile could rewrite property lines. One guy was using my driveway as his personal restroom, phone glued to his ear, while another rummaged through a cooler under my covered entryway, acting like he'd rented the place. 3 cars blocked my garage, trapping my truck and leaving $3,000 worth of stone and tile samples soaking in the downpour. When I jogged over to Laura's house to ask her to move the cars, she greeted me in a flowing sundress, wine glass in hand, her smile as polished as her manipulation. "Ethan, it's just a little community spirit," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, as if my complaint was a personal attack on neighborly love. Behind her, laughter roared from her living room, like the party was cheering her trespass. I kept my tone even, explaining I needed to secure my equipment, but her eyes flickered with calculation. "It's our first summer connection event," she said, loud enough for her guests to hear. "Your driveway's so convenient for parking." The implication was clear. My property was a community resource, and I was the selfish one for objecting. I walked back through the rain, parked my truck 3 blocks away, and spent 40 minutes hauling heavy materials to my garage, soaked and furious. But it wasn't just the physical strain that burned. It was Laura's calculated dismissal, framing me as the villain before I'd even finished speaking. The next morning, an email from the Oakwood Lane HOA, signed by Laura, confirmed my worst fears. Every Saturday all summer, my driveway was community parking. This wasn't a one-time oversight. It was a deliberate plan. As I stood staring at my driveway, imagining it blocked for months, one thought crystallized. Laura Hensley had no idea who she'd just crossed. A week later, the first official Community Connection Saturday arrived. By 6 p.m., 5 cars formed a wall across my driveway, sealing me off from the street. Laura's guests raised glasses on her lawn while I sat at my kitchen table, unable to access my garage. I had a 7:30 meeting with a clienta $15,000 backyard renovation contract, and my drawings and samples were trapped 20 feet away. I called the client, fumbling through an explanation about neighborhood issues, but he wasn't interested in rescheduling. Just like that, $15,000 vanished because Laura's party took priority over my property. My hands shook as I hung up, not from rage, but from the sick realization that this was deliberate interference with my livelihood. I snapped photos of the cars, capturing license plates and timestamps, and fired off a sterile email to Laura, knowing she'd twist any emotion against me. Her response came within hours, a masterpiece of manipulation. "I understand how stressful community activities can be. Perhaps this is about work pressures?" She didn't just dismiss mesh diagnosed me, implying my business concerns were mental health issues. I was being strangled with silk. Desperate to reclaim my space, I installed 2 small, private property signs at my driveway's entrance, professional and compliant with HOA rules. 4 hours later, an email violation notice arrived, citing aesthetic guidelines and a $100 fine. The speed was chilling. Laura was watching, waiting, ready to crush any resistance. The second Saturday brought 8 cars, with Laura herself directing traffic like a valet at her personal estate. Her guests' kids spilled juice on my lawn. Their dog tore up my mulch. I was trapped in my own house, a prisoner behind a barricade of SUVs. Holding a brick from my workshop, I imagined its arc toward Laura's champagne glass, but set it down and called the non-emergency police line instead. When the officer arrived, Laura swooped in, her smile disarming. "I'm Laura Hensley, HOA president," she said, her tone dripping with concern. "I'm worried about Ethan. He's been so stressed lately." The officer's gaze shifted, and suddenly I was the unstable neighbor overreacting to a party. He left, advising me to work with my neighbors, and I realized Laura's manipulation was airtight. That night, I decided Laura's civilized game was over. She'd escalated with someone who could fight back. I called my crew chief and planned an overnight operation. On Friday, I secured a permit for a landscape renovation, specifying a herringbone brick patio. The clerk stamped it with approval, noting how stunning it would look. Saturday night, as Laura's biggest party yet raged, my crew moved in at 8:30 p.m., working under floodlights with surgical precision. We ripped out the concrete and laid bricks, each one a silent curse against her audacity. By sunrise, my driveway was a work of art raised 6 inches with planted borders, impossible to park on. I sat on my porch, coffee in hand, watching the sunlight hit the bricks like a spotlight on victory. Laura emerged to clean up, striding toward my driveway with confidence, then froze, her face cycling through shock, confusion, and dread. Her parking lot was gone. 3 days later, an emergency HOA meeting was called, the email's subject line screaming, "Harmony under threat." Laura's message painted me as a neighborhood terrorist without naming me, rallying residents to defend community spirit. The room was packed, chairs shifting as I entered, whispers trailing me like a guilty verdict. Laura opened with her usual polish, painting my patio as a threat to property values, her charts and legal opinions a fortress of paper. Neighbors nodded, praising her potlucks and fearing chaos. Then Clara Thompson, a 72-year-old retired teacher, stood up, her voice steady as granite. "This isn't about a patio," she said, facing Laura. "It's about a pattern. Remember the Carter family?" Murmurs rippled through the room. The Carters had been harassed with violations: fence color, garden stones, mailbox placement until they sold their house for $40,000 below market value and fled. Clara's words cracked Laura's facade, her smile flickering as doubt seeped into the crowd. The legal hammer dropped 3 days later. A 12-page letter from the county's priciest law firm, accusing my patio of unauthorized structural modification and demanding its removal, plus damages for lowered property values. Page 8 was the gut punch. Failure to comply could lead to a lien on my house, forcing a sale. My lawyer warned that fighting would drain my savings, even if I won. That evening, I visited Clara, who shared a folder of documents detailing the Carters' ordeal. She'd tracked violation notices, fines, and suspicious HOA payments to a consulting firm, Residential Property Solutions, specializing in value optimization. The payments aligned with the Carters' harassment, ending when they sold. 3 other families had followed the same pattern: targeted, fined, driven out, with HOA improvement funds flowing after each sale. Laura was running a racket, using her position to force sales for profit. The night before the final HOA meeting, my dining room became a war room, papers mapping Laura's scheme. Buried in the HOA bylaws, Section 12 exempted my patio from approval, a sword hidden in fine print. I met Laura at a coffee shop, recording as she casually admitted to pushing out families like the Carters for community vision. Her words were a confession, delivered with the confidence of someone untouchable. At the meeting, Laura's presentation was a polished attack, but I stood and read Section 12, proving my patio's legality. Faces in the crowd shifted, realization dawning. I played Laura's recording, her voice admitting to forcing out residents. The room froze. Clara followed, her folder exposing years of targeted harassment. Neighbors erupted, connecting dots, demanding answers. Laura's defense claiming I'd violated her privacy crumbled. A vote of no confidence ousted her as president, and the HOA suspended her lawsuit, launching a fraud investigation. The next morning, a for sale sign appeared in Laura's yard. My brick patio gleamed under the streetlight, a testament to victory. Clara waved from her garden, calling out, "Justice tastes better than revenge, doesn't it?" I smiled, not just for my win, but for the families who'd get their chance at justice. As I sipped coffee on my patio, I knew exposing the truth had dismantled a bully's empire. What would you do if your neighbor stole your property for their parties? Comment below and tell me where you're reading from. I'd love to hear your take.